I get as much fun out of growing vegetables as I do out of any other part of the garden, because a well-run vegetable garden is just as much an attractive garden feature as a shrub or a herbaceous border, and it's got the added advantage that everything you grow is right for taking into the kitchen and cooking. But to get crops like this, you need to put in a lot of hard work right through the growing season. And as far as I'm concerned, the growing season starts with the winter digging. That's when you make things right for the things that you're going to put in to grow on the following summer. I often ask myself whether winter digging's worthwhile, particularly at the end of a hard day in the garden, but my experience has proved to me there's no substitute. By digging, I increase the depth of my soil, because remember that my garden is right on the edge of the moors. I'm fairly high up, very thin soil, only about 8 inches deep. Freely drained, yes, but nothing in it, no humus, none of the stuff that makes for soil fertility. So what I'm doing is improving the depth of the soil. I'm banging in plenty of this stuff. Compost, manure, anything that'll rot down in the soil and make that black amorphous material that they call humus. That's the heart of soil fertility. Reservoir of moisture, it holds nutriment against leaching. And then the additional bonus, I skim off the top inch of the soil. I'm burying the weeds, the dormant weed seeds. I'm putting them 8 inches down, which means in the spring I'm going to get what? Possibly a month that is clear of weed problem to begin with. I'm going to have my own seeds, the peas, the beans, the beetroot, the carrots, all coming up free from competition. Something that invariably happens when I'm doing the winter digging, I haven't got enough manure. It happens every year, I can guarantee it, but it doesn't really matter, because the mixture I'm using of peat and spent hops is a very good substitute, because it's wrong to think of manure as a feed. For me, in my own garden, always it's purely a soil conditioner. And as I build up fertility, so my soil gets richer. And peat does that because very good in the soil. It holds a lot of moisture, up to 20 times its own weight. And the spent hops, which are specially treated, give that little added fertilizer value. So don't worry if you haven't got enough muck, and it's impossible. I make all the compost I can get, but I find it impossible to make enough to keep my own garden going. So I supplement it with peat, with farm manure, whatever I can get that'll rot down in the soil, because that's the secret of good gardening, putting plenty of humus-forming material into the soil. And all you've got to do, dig it in. Make a leisurely business of digging, don't rush at it. It's the contemplative job of gardening. Always a tremendous sense of satisfaction when you've finished the winter digging. After all, I've been at it a long time, but the plot is there clean, dug, manured, all ready for me. And even though I had a rough idea of what my rotation was going to be before I started the digging, because what you're growing on a particular plot depends on what manure you put into it. Vitally important to rotate your crops. You avoid building up disease, but more important, you use every scrap of fertilizer residue that you put on, because a cabbage takes something different out of the soil to a root crop. A cabbage takes nitrogen, a root crop takes phosphates. So by rotating them round the garden, I get the best possible use out of the soil. And my rotation is simple. Though I must have new potatoes, nothing can taste as good as new potatoes straight out of the garden into the pot. So I have a couple of rows of new potatoes, but they're not really part of my crop rotation. I maintain that main crop potatoes are cheap enough now, in general, to enable me to say, no, I'm not wasting garden space on them. There's much more valuable things that taste better. A simple, basic 3-course rotation. I grow on the heavily manured plot, I grow my peas, my beans, my runner beans. They need this boost, this fertile soil. Peas are what I call real mucky feeders. They'll take everything they can get out of the soil, and you don't get a decent crop unless you put it there to begin with. So I go on my first plot, my peas, my beans, my runner beans. On my second plot, my brassicas, my cabbage, my cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, Savoy. Cabbage. Cauliflowers need a moisture-retentive, fertile soil to get the best possible results. And on the third plot, which hasn't had any muck at all, but which I give a tickle of treated hop manure, just to hold the moisture, I grow the root crops. The beetroot, carrots, parsnips if you like them. And then in between the rows, because you use every inch of space in a small garden, I intercrop with radish, with lettuce, with spring onions, a little bit of parsley. Just to add a herbal flavour, then each year you rotate the plot so you get the best possible return out of every part of the vegetable garden. And because this garden's cold, and make no mistake, it is cold, high up in the Dales, the growing season starts late and finishes early. So I steal a march on the weather by starting as many crops as I possibly can in heat on the kitchen windowsill, because my greenhouse isn't heated. It's much too expensive. And there they can get on with the business of growing while the weather's getting the soil into the best possible condition to receive them. There's no way you can get that sort of texture into a soil without rough digging it in the autumn and then leaving it for the weather to work on, for the frost to get into and break the great rough clods down. Alternate freezing and thawing, it produces that crummy structure which is ideal for seed sowing. And I wait in the spring until I see the weed seeds germinating. That's a sign the soil's warming up. Until I see the top of the clods beginning to dry. But more important still, until it's close to the time for seed sowing. Waste of time raking it down weeks before you need it for seed sowing, because the rain comes, it all caps and you're back to square one. So, when I start, I get stuck into the whole lot, rough rake it down, and then it's all ready. When the weather's right, I can get on, do the sowing, do the planting. You know, there's no more satisfying sight to a vegetable gardener than that. The plot all freshly raked down, ready for sowing and planting. And the first things to go in will be the new potatoes. And I've had them chitting, that's sprouting up, on the porch windowsill for 4 weeks now. And I sprout them because past experience has shown me that by putting sprouts on like that, I get new potatoes a fortnight earlier. But you don't need all the shoots, so I just take my finger before I put them in and I rub out all those lower down, the weaker ones. Because what I want to do is make the plant produce roots while it's making top growth. So leave the strong ones at the top. And with the soil in good condition, I plant potatoes with a trowel. And I put them in 4 inches down, 12 inches between the tubers and 2 feet between the rows, and then I add a handful of peat for the roots to break into. It tucks them up, so to speak, and then it's a case of rubbing out the unwanted shoots and just pop the potatoes in and cover them up. And because my family really enjoy peas, and never mind the family, I like them as well, so I grow a lot of them. And to sow them, I take out a 2-inch deep drill, a spade width wide, right across the plot. Then, to give me an even base, I rake any surplus soil out from the bottom of the drill. It's a very handy little rake, that. I space the peas 2 inches apart, which gives me 3 across the full width of the drill. May seem a lot of trouble to take over a row of peas, but what I'm doing is making certain that every pea that's sown in there has its opportunity, its fair share of light and space and nutriment. And above all, it'll look grand when they come up, and all I've done is raked about 1 inch of soil over the top of the peas, left them in a slight depression. That makes it easier. I can cover them with wire netting to stop the birds lifting them. And then when it comes to putting the supports in, I can see exactly where the supports need to go. Now, I take pleasure in planting all vegetables, but I take a great deal more pleasure in planting those that I enjoy eating the best, and broad beans are very good indeed. I start a few plants under glass. Again, always this trying to beat the weather, to get over the lateness of my spring. And I've got enough plants there to do about half a row, and then I'll finish the rest off by sowing seed. And I put them in 9 inches apart, and a long growing tube like that, ideal for broad beans because they've got the depth of root run there. The roots are right through the bottom. I don't need to take the container off because it'll rot in the soil. So there's absolutely no root disturbance at all. They should grow away without even knowing they've been moved. And I like to grow my beans in double rows, 9 inches apart, and because I haven't got enough plants to do a full row across the garden, come back and stagger them. That's put one bean 9 inches apart between the 2 already planted. And that should work very well. I get as far as I can with those, and then I just continue with seed sowing. And your drill for the seeds wants to be about 3 inches deep. They're fairly hefty seeds. Now get up through that all right. And then move the line over 9 inches. I do like to work in straight lines. It's so much better to take a little more time and get your measurements exact. So while it's growing, everything looks neat and tidy, and it makes weed control, push hoeing through and weeding much easier. And just like the planting, it's a simple double row, staggered. So I leave the stick in that row and put the seed in the opposite row, exactly halfway between the 2 seeds in the first row. If you're in any doubt about whether all the seeds are going to germinate, and I always am, because there's always something happens to one, you tread on it, you push it off, sow a few extra ones at the end of the row. And then if there's a failure, you just dig one of the spares up and plant it. There are some crops that, whether you like eating them or not, for your own pride's sake, you like to make certain that you grow them really well. And to make certain I give my onions the best possible start, I keep them in the same place year after year, so the soil fertility builds up. Because I dig in manure every autumn, then liquid feed the onions once a fortnight from May to July, the soil has to get better and better. And I plant the onions 6 inches apart, and with 10 inches between the rows. That gives you enough room to feed and to keep the weeds down without damaging the roots. So, at the end of the summer, I should be able to look down a row of onions, 1.5 pounds even all the way down, that store well and that have the proper flavour. One of the problems when you're growing any of the brassicas, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, anything like that, is cabbage root fly. Now, my control has always been just to get a little impregnated felt disc and pop them round the neck of the plant so they just wrap around the stalk at soil level. And that prevents the cabbage root fly laying its eggs, which it has to do, in the surface of the soil. The disc prevents that happening, and of course you get no attack from root fly. And it works. It's the only protection I give my brassicas against root fly attack, and it works for me because I get a crop every year. It's got a little expansion area like that. You pop it round, and of course as the stem grows the disc expands with it, so there's no question of damaging the stem at any time. Leeks and Brussels sprouts are the most important winter vegetables I grow, and leeks stand in the ground right through the winter. In other words, I've got to grow enough to see us through from what, November to the end of April, because the whole of my family enjoy leek soup. And I make a hole with a flat-ended dibber about 6 inches deep, and then I simply pop the young leek plant in. You don't fill the hole in, just a trickle of soil to hold the roots, and the rain will do the rest. And if the roots of the plant are too long, then cut them back. I do it in any case. And you trim the tops, and that's to stop the worms heaving them out of the ground. If you go along with leaving the tops on, the worms pull them out overnight, they dry out, and they never really make good plants. It's always good policy particularly with new and very much more productive varieties of potatoes, to earth them up. If you don't, you get a lot of tubers forming almost at soil level. They turn green and they're then totally inedible. In fact, they can be quite poisonous. So I've taken the trouble to get the soil ready. I've taken the trouble to buy good seed potatoes. I take the trouble to plant them. It would be silly not to go to the trouble of just running a little bit of earth up along the row. And I've already done them once. This is the last and final earthing up, the next process. I'll be digging them up and eating them with sea salt for supper. Lovely. Nothing like a good start with runner beans. And this is one crop with tomatoes that I must not fail with, because they're my wife's favourite. So I sow them in pots in the greenhouse and grow them on like that until they get embarrassingly large, and then you stick them out in the ground. And I put them on wigwams because I can accommodate that better in my garden, and they look neater. I've got 2 plants in that pot. So I'll leave them both in there because the soil is in very good condition. I dug a lot of manure in last autumn. And I put a base dressing of a slow release fertilizer on because I want them to carry on right till the end of October, hopefully. And I wouldn't really get a crop if I didn't start them like that. And by starting them under glass, you get them into crop so much earlier than if you sowed them into the open ground, because the soil is cold, very cold when you should be sowing the beans. So they just don't germinate, they rot off. And in spite of growing runner beans for donkey's years, I still can never remember from year to year whether they twine anti-clockwise or clockwise. I think it's anti-clockwise, but best thing to do when in doubt is leave them to make their own minds up. So I just put a little loop tie up. I can go whichever way it likes. Well, that's it. I've prepared the soil well, plenty of manure. I've given them wigwams to grow on. They're good, strong, healthy plants. They couldn't have had a better start. I shall water them if it's dry. I'll give them a liquid feed. And then the next stage will be the picking and the eating. And that's why growing vegetables is worthwhile. While you're working, you've got the anticipation. Normal staking doesn't work with peas in my garden because when the plants get up and the full weight of crop goes on them, the wind just blows plants and stakes over. So I've devised a stronger method. I use fairly heavy stakes with canes looped between them to take the full weight of the pea home, and then I throw netting over to give them the support to climb on. And when you've got a row of cauliflowers all growing well, they have the unfortunate habit of all coming to maturity at the same time. But you can preserve them against the heads opening up under sunlight by just bending the outer leaves over the centre like that to put them into shade. And I'm never frightened to pull the onions as they're ready. Once they're big enough, we use them as we need them. And I grow the onions next to the carrots because the strong scent of the onion foliage disguises the scent of the carrot leaves as I pull them, because it's the smell of the carrot leaves that attracts the carrot fly. I didn't thin them at all, because really, why bother thinning them when you get carrots like that? They're lovely, they're succulent, and my family have a good appetite for fresh grown vegetables, so I don't stint them when I'm pulling them. You know, my garden wouldn't be complete unless I had a vegetable garden, because it doesn't stop with the vegetables this summer. I plan it so I've got Brussels sprouts, and I've got winter cabbage, and I've got sprouting broccoli, and then spring cabbage in the spring. No. You may not save a fortune on the family budget, but my goodness, you give your taste buds a treat every time you go into the garden and pick fresh vegetables.
Details of the planting plans are in the BBC book, Mr. Smith's Favourite Garden, from bookshops. And the BBC has produced 3 video cassettes on gardening, all presented by Geoffrey Smith. They're Mr. Smith's Vegetable Garden, Mr. Smith's Flower Garden, and Mr. Smith's Indoor Garden, all available from retailers. And next Monday evening at 6:25, Geoffrey Smith shows how to create a herb garden.